completely lost.
Welcome. All right, today we're going to talk about Nazi Germany. Surprise, surprise, since that's kind of the theme. But today I want to take a look a little bit at the church during the time of Nazi Germany. There's much more that can be done on this topic. Those of you who I'm sure already are well along on your papers, you don't need a paper topic. Because, I know kind of diligence there isn't here in the room. But, perhaps you could abandon that one for a new topic. The church and, sorry, let it go. The church and Nazi Germany. That's what we want to look at today. Now, one thing about the Nazis, they didn't like communism. So, if you don't like communism, then we know, I guess maybe, where you're coming from. You just say, hey, I don't like them. I don't like the communism. You could get a job at a restaurant and get fired. Well, another thing that the Nazis didn't like was basically anybody didn't agree with them. One of the people that does come on their radar are the Lutherans. Now, we need to probably back up just a step and say that within Germany, let's say in the 1920s, the 1930s, you had two main church groups. I'm not saying there weren't others, but there were two main ones. You had Roman Catholicism, primarily in the southern part of Germany, Bavaria, in areas like that, were strongly Roman Catholic. While in the north, you have Protestant Christianity, almost all of which is Lutheran. There are a few pockets of Calvinism, followers of John Calvin, I mean by that. But primarily the Lutherans were in the north. Now, Prussia was in the north. Prussians were primarily Lutherans. And they were the guys sort of calling the shots prior to the rise of the Nazi Party. And we don't have time really to go back and think about all the religious history of Germany, although we should remember that, of course, Martin Luther was a German, and his protest against the Catholic Church led to a lot of upheaval in Germany, and eventually the wars of religion, back in the 16th century, culminating with the Peace of Augsburg, which will basically say, whatever the religion of the prince or the ruler in your area is, that will be the religion of that area. So this is a state church. But instead of having one state church over the whole state, remember, Germany was not unified until 1870. So there were hundreds of years where the prince, if he was a Roman Catholic and you lived in that area, then you were a Roman Catholic. Well, the Nazis are going to see the church as a threat. Why? Well, why would you think? Why would the church be potentially a threat to the Nazis? Okay, loyalty. Yeah, so let's say you're a Roman Catholic. You're supposed to follow the teachings of the Pope, right? That means there's an outside authority that you're listening to from Rome. Or if you're a Protestant, there is a hierarchy in the church, like say the Lutheran Church, bishops and so forth, and of course your local priest. Okay? And what do you think the fear would be if people listened to these people? What do you think the Nazis would be afraid that you might do or not do?
Like revolt.
Revolt, yeah, revolt, protest. Yeah. They tell me I'm supposed to pause and wait for answers. Sometimes I do that, but we only have so much time in the class. Yeah, you know, the idea here is you've got a leader, and this leader might not agree, likely, in many cases not agree, with what is being taught. Because, you know, in essence, the Nazi philosophy, if you will, is like a religion in many aspects, depending on how you define a religion. They have a source of revelation, a source of knowledge that you're supposed to follow. They have a leader. They have ritual. Nazis got all kinds of rituals. You know, one of the things they do, it's called the blood flag. Anybody know the Nazi blood flag? You ever heard of that? It would be fallen heroes. Their blood was shed on the ground. And so the battle flags of those different units, of those different people who died, were sort of like martyrs of the church. And in fact, they would touch the flag, the banner, to the dead and to the area, and then they would have a whole ceremony. Well, when you watch Triumph of the Will, you're going to see this. You may not know that's what it is, but keep your eyes open. But you'll see a thing where they take a flag up, they kind of take the two flags and they touch them together. And they're doing that to basically, the idea of the physical touch is that it's bringing sort of the blood of the martyrs, the remembrance of the heroes, and is bringing them together in all these other flags and uniting them. So that then all those banners, all those flags, when they are there together, are touched together, combining all of what has gone before. And then from there, of course, when they go into battle, they can call upon the strength of their fallen comrades. Yeah.
So in the video, when Hitler's shaking hands and touching the flags, is that
Yes.
like just the symbol of it, or actually was the blood on that?
Well, see, that's the question, isn't it? I think that they're very mystical. I think Nazis are very mystical, or what do you want to call it? And I think he thinks it's more than just touching a flag. I think, so you remember seeing that, right? That's sort of what they're doing. It's the idea of sort of bringing the power of the deceased to those who are alive, especially the heroes, the fallen, the brave. And by us touching it, it makes us more heroic, it taps us into the power, or whatever you want to call it, into the force of bravery and honor and being willing to go into battle and die if you need to, like they did. I mean, Hitler was really into symbology and ritual, and I don't think it was just for show. I mean, I think he thought there was something to it. Okay, so yes, there is a sense in which the Nazi party and the Nazi philosophy has a lot of religious elements. I don't know if you want to call it a religion or not, but they certainly would see aspects of the church, whether it be Roman Catholic or Protestant, as a potential threat. So in fact, what happens then, in 1932, a German church is formed. This is made up of church leaders who will cooperate, who will sympathize, who will, I guess, potentially also be Nazis, and leaders of the church. They called it the German Evangelical Church. Deutsche Evangelische Kirche. The German Evangelistic Church. Now, I might say they're more Nazi than Christian, although they bring Christian elements into it. And by the way, there were certain people they didn't like. Membership was limited to the Aryan race. So that may exclude some people from their membership. Go ye into all the Aryan world and preach the gospel. Okay, so it's very limited. And of course, all of the teaching, the dogma, it's a word we don't use too much, right? I guess it's a theology word, Latin word. It's good, I think. It just means teachings, but but dogma, like we get the word dogmatic, that's if you have a robot dog. When I start my company making robot dogs, that's going to be the name of the company, Dogmatic. So when we say dogmatic, of course, a lot of people get nervous because I think in our day and age today, what do you guys think of dogma or dogmatic ideas or things like that when it comes to the church? Should the church have dogma or kiddima? Just dogma. Yes, but what's the but?
If that dogma which you are standing for
Mm-hmm.
ends up being wrong at its core, then there's a problem there.
Well, of course, my dogma is right. So you're trying to imply that I might have false dogma.
Yes, that those exist within the church.
Okay. So how are you going to determine if it's right or wrong?
I guess you can't really say that, but
Oh. Well, you see, it seems in our day and age, today, and maybe this is more your day and age than my day and age, because I probably don't count. I know in most groups I don't count. Anyway, there seems to be the idea of you, especially when it comes to religion, you don't want to hold something very strongly. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but that's what it seems like. Well, yeah, I go to that church, or you don't go to church, or you're a neo-Nazi who works at a restaurant, and I don't. But that's okay. We're just, you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy. Just don't kill me. That's pretty good rule of thumb. I would like to have most people would have on their list. Don't kill me. Yeah, I would like that. I'm not really looking for that, to be murdered. Yeah, well, but I don't know. It just seems like, for example, here's my example, and again, maybe I'm wrong. It used to be at churches that people would say you need to follow Jesus or you were going to hell. I don't hear anybody saying that anymore. They just say, oh, you should follow Jesus. You should he loves you and you love him. Let's just it's kind of like the Barney. What's that Barney song? Do you remember the Barney? Do you remember the Barney? Yes! I love you, you love me, let's all be a family, whatever it is. The Barney, it's sort of the Barney thing. I'm going to love you, you love me, let's be a family. Let's not talk about things, like when you get to Thanksgiving dinner and you show up there with your family, there are certain things probably your mother says don't mention to Uncle Ralph. Don't mention that, you got a tattoo to Uncle Ralph because he doesn't like him. So you avoid certain topics that might be divisive. Well, I argue they don't have enough food. Or they don't have the right food. All right, well, you get where I'm coming from here, right? Now, what would be one of the inherent problems, you think, in a church that limited its membership to the Aryan race and its teaching? What sort of basic teachings might be difficult to be a Christian and hold to the teachings about the Aryan race being superior? Anything cross your mind? Yeah. A lot of this discussion stuff, speaking of hens, as we were earlier, Taylor, this is like pulling hen's teeth. I think I said that last week.
I used that. I told my mother that.
You told your mother about hen's teeth?
And I gave you credit for it.
And what did she say?
I thought it was a
Well, I would like to take all the credit, but my mother used to say it to me, so. I got a feeling my mother probably didn't make it up either. But at least I've latched onto it, and now I've passed it on to you. You can pass it on to your children, and they can pass it on to their children. So I hope that in 1,000 years, people will still be saying, this is hard as pulling hen's teeth. They won't even know what a hen is. Because everything will be made in a petri dish. Like they're making synthetic beef now. They're growing it in a petri dish or something.
It actually tastes pretty good.
For the bird.
Well, that's not meat.
I had a Universal for actually.
Oh, who?
Universal Studios had it too.
A Universal Studio what?
In Orlando.
Yeah.
I like the Awesome Burger.
Yeah, but that's all vegetable. That's got no meat.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Very tasty. Almost tasted just like
Almost. But think of all the chemicals in there to make it taste like meat. The point is, you shouldn't like beef. You shouldn't eat anything. That to me is like selling out and saying, "Oh, I'm gonna be a vegetarian. I'm gonna be a vegan, but I'm still gonna eat meat. I want something to taste like meat. You should despise meat." No, not me. Leave it for me. I'll eat the meat.
You don't see people who eat meat putting steak into the shape of broccoli.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
You don't try to make a steak taste like broccoli. So you shouldn't try broccoli to taste like steak. Ooh, or shake.
I wouldn't mind it. They used to have these, when I was a kid, Mom used to buy these chicken nuggets that are shaped with vegetables.
Used to buy what?
Chicken nuggets that are shaped with
Oh
vegetables.
yeah, well chicken nuggets not meat either. So, we can't count that. Yeah, you're right. Chicken nuggets you can make. That they take, they you know, like they puree up the meat and then they ooze it out into a shape. And then you bread it and deep fry it, and people like it. I submit to you that almost anything breaded and deep fried, people will eat. Just go to a state fair or something. They got everything. All right, well, we got a little off the topic. Talking about vegetable-shaped meat at the state fair. One of the things I was hoping that perhaps you would think about is the idea that Aryans don't like certain people, right? The Nazis don't, they like Aryans, but what does that mean they don't like? Everyone else, including handicapped people. Let's just say differently abled, shall we? Gypsies. Anybody else? What's that?
Non-blondes.
Non-blondes.
Blacks, Jews.
Blacks, Jews. Now, let's just stop there. Who is the main person in Christianity?
Jesus Christ.
And what was he? Jewish. We don't like Jews if we're Aryans, but yet Jesus was a Jew, wasn't he? I think they try to alter some of that teaching.
I don't know, a lot of European churches, the stained glass, Jesus doesn't look very Jewish.
Well, artistic license.
Yeah, he's got brown hair. Something that.
Probably your church was blonde.
Well, this gets to one of the issues. Jesus was a Jew. All of his disciples were Jewish. And now we're saying that, Jews are bad. We don't want to listen to Jews. So they actually went and kind of altered some of that teaching. So you remember when Hitler was arrested in 1923, he wrote a book then called Mein Kampf. In it, of course, as we've already talked about, Jews are blamed for, just about everything. All of the ills of Germany, the bad economy, losing World War I, the list could go on. And the Jews, they said, controlled both the Weimar Republic and the Communist Party. And that both of these diametrically opposed groups were in fact controlled by a Jewish conspiracy working behind the scenes to control the world. But the Aryan race was ultimately superior, and the Aryan race needs to be alerted. They need to fight against this power. Yeah, go ahead.
So I've always been a little curious, because obviously we're well aware that
What led them to the conclusions that they didn't like the Jews? That the Jews wanted to take over?
do we know? Or
Well, I mean, there is a basic, it's just like today. There are certain things that some people might label as conspiracies today. Why do the people hold to them that hold to them without naming any of the... Sure, flat earth, that's a safe one. Well, in part because they believe it's true. Why do they hold to it? I think some of them actually believe it. So, it is a conspiracy, but they think it's a true... We always get the idea if something's a conspiracy, it's false. But they actually believed it was true. All right? Like people out to get me, that's obviously true. So why do I hold to it? Because it's fact. So I mean, that's part of it. They actually, I think many of them actually believed it. They really did believe it, or they became convinced of it. Of course, Hitler's rhetoric, his propaganda, did influence people, and you have people who are afraid. You have people, generally people want easy answers, right? It's a pretty easy answer to say our problems are caused by the Jews. So how do we solve our problems? We remove the Jewish influence. And then what? Things will get better. Why did we lose World War I? Conspiracy of the Jews. Why is our economy failing? Conspiracy of the Jews, and so forth. So, when you sit back and look at it, you say, well, how can I hold to this? But partially is people were afraid. People are looking for an answer. Hitler offered an answer. It was a simple answer, and he repeated it over and over. So yeah, I guess I don't have all the answers to it, but I do know that ultimately most people want a simple answer to their problems. Well, he believed that they were in a life and death struggle. Now, I think Hitler really believed this stuff. I don't think he's just creating this book to get power. I mean, I think he wants power. But I mean, I don't think it's a fabrication. I think he actually believes these things. Well, I think if we say somebody is crazy, then we kind of dismiss it. Somebody is talking on and on about something. We say, well, that guy's just crazy. Then we don't really have to deal with what they're saying, because we just dismissed what they say by saying, oh, the guy's nuts, he's crazy. Well, was he crazy? I mean, I suppose it depends on your definition of crazy, right? Is he psychopathic or something? So, I don't study all that stuff because I don't want to learn about myself. Basically, if I studied all that stuff and I learned about myself, then I suppose somebody would expect me to do something about it. Now I just live with it. I just make the crazy work for me. But yeah, was Hitler crazy? I mean, by the psychologist, I guess we're all crazy, right? Somehow, that's how they get employed. By telling everybody they're crazy, you need to come and have years and years of counseling and psychotherapy and pay them, like $100 for every 15 minutes. So I'm not disparaging it. I'm sure it's very helpful for some people. A wonderful thing, a wonderful occupation that I encourage everyone to consider good mental health in October, which I have just designated Mental Health Month. I don't know, it probably is a Mental Health Month. I just don't know which one it is. Well, anyway, yeah, I guess, yeah, he was crazy. But, there's one thing to be, crazy, like sitting in a room and thinking people are after you. It's another thing to be crazy and, go out and plan mass genocide. So, I mean, I guess these are they're different levels of crazy. But I think he actually believed this. And I think he was persuasive enough that he got other people to believe it. And even those who didn't believe it, I think they kind of went along with it because it was, I guess, believable. Well, as you remember, these are just some of the basic points of the Nazi teaching. Jews are in a conspiracy. They're evil. They control the government. They control political parties. but the Aryan race is superior. But the problem, he would say, is that the Aryan race needs to wake up and figure out what's going on before it's too late. And of course, he's doing that for him. Hitler also hated cities and factories. I mean, even though he's going to use it, cities and factories. But I guess what I would say is Hitler's a romantic. Now, not romance in the sense of fireplace, and candles, and certain kind of music, dim the lights kind of romantic. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about romantic in the sense that he thought about the past in a romantic way, in a way that in which the past was elevated to a new level. And he pined for the days, the good old days, I guess I'd say, when, Germany was strong, when there were strong people working the fields, raising the crops, putting in a hard day's work, coming back to the house with a family, having a dinner together, sharing the ideas of the fatherland of Germany and, probably some good Wurst, maybe some Bratwurst, und Leberwurst, some Kartoffelsalat, and maybe a nice Strudel for dinner. Okay. In other words, traditional things. That's kind of making me hungry too. I do like knockwurst and potato salad.
Charles made some Jaeger schnitzel.
Oh, they did. Schnitzel.
It wasn't Jaeger schnitzel. They called it Jaeger schnitzel. It was still good though.
Yeah. Well, I like schnitzel. That's a good way to take care of those little chickens that we were talking about. Make some chicken schnitzel. Although traditionally it's pork. A pork schnitzel. That's good stuff. I could Wiener Schnitzel. I like Wiener Schnitzel. Thinking up all kinds of good stuff, aren't we? Well, anyway, that's, and then Germany needs to get back to that rural life because also, the urban life is filled with communists and Jewishness. Need to get out in the countryside, have a Lebensraum, living space. And of course they need a Führer. Where are they going to find one? I think Hitler's got an idea where they might find a good leader. Well, let's get to the heart of the matter before we run out of time, shall we? No? Okay. Enter the scene is Ludwig Miller. Here is a anti-Nazi propaganda cartoon, or whatever you want to call it. It's got Adolf, you see marked right on his sleeve Adolf, just in case you can't pick that out that that's Adolf. Then it's got the German youth. In case you can't tell, it's marked right there on his shirt, German youth. And you see a pretty good-sized syringe being poked into the arm of the German youth. And up here, you see a dead corpse holding a cross. I don't know if that's holy water being sprinkled on it or not. I don't know. But at any rate, the German government then, the Nazi government, created an office known as Reichsbishop. Reich means the state, the government. So this is remember they have a state government, so they want to make sure that the bishop of the country is on board with them. This is Ludwig Miller. So Ludwig Miller will be carrying out some of these practices. One is this. He wanted to remove any clergy that was of Jewish descent. For obvious reasons. To him. Obvious. Also, here's the number 2 rule of the Fight Club. Don't ever talk about the Fight Club. That's number 1 rule. Clergy shouldn't oppose the Nazi Party. Well, that goes against the government. It goes against the party. We don't want you making some sermon, some homily, which points out negative things about the Nazi Party. Here's a couple things I think you'll find interesting. They wanted to remove amen and hallelujah from the church vocabulary. So you say your prayers and you say Amen, Amen. Or you sing that song, Amen, Amen. You can't do that anymore. Or hallelujah. Can I get a hallelujah? Praise the Lord. Close enough. Close enough. Yeah, so why? Because it's Hebrew. You don't want any Hebrew language slipping in there. And they rewrote the New Testament so that Jesus was not Jewish. He was Aryan. Where do we get this idea that Jesus is Jewish? They would say, well, that was slipped in there later to, change the truth. It's what I call fake news. So these are some of the things that Ludwig Miller will bring about. And you can see how the German evangelical church. Now, I don't want you to think that that is the end of the story. There are other members of the leadership, clergy, if you will, who opposed the Nazis. And they will not go along with this German evangelical church and its alterations of teaching. These are often called the confessing church. It's a movement that begins in 34. And basically they wanted to resist all of these things, all the changes to the teachings and so forth. They met together in May of 1934, and this is how they found their beginning in what's known as the Synod at Barmen. The Synod at Barmen issued a statement, kind of a doctrinal statement, which rejects all of the Nazi ideology and affirms the, I guess what we'd say, the orthodox or traditional standard teachings of the church. Now, this will not go unnoticed by certain people within the Nazi Party. Obviously, now we have identified where the threat resides. It's in the confessing church, and particularly in the leadership of the confessing church. So they will become targets. Entering this scene is a guy maybe you've heard of. You ever heard of Big Carl? Karl Barth? Karl Barth. Karl Barth's one of the leaders of this group. He lives up until 1968. Why? Because he got kicked out of Germany. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have made it. So, but the reason he got kicked out is he wasn't truly a German. He was Swiss, and he lived in Germany. So they exiled him, they kicked him out, they blocked him, sent him back to Switzerland, where he would live on. Now, Karl Barth is a neo-Orthodox theologian. For those of you who are neo-Orthodox. I'm not a neo-Orthodox, I'll just tell you up front. That's all right. Karl Barth opposed the Nazis. So I give him credit where credit is due. Here's another important player, Martin Niemöller. See, let's say somebody in here who, I know there would be nobody like this in this situation, who has not yet picked a paper topic. The church during the time of the Nazis would be an excellent paper. In fact, probably too broad. You'd want to focus on one aspect of it. Like, say, you could look at the Roman Catholic response, you could look at the Protestant response, you could look at an individual like Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller is a Protestant leader, born in Germany, so he's a German. And, the other thing that gives him some street cred with the Nazis is that he was a World War I soldier. In fact, he was a submarine commander in World War I. And after the war, he enters the ministry in 1924. So, it's hard to portray him as a traitor or anti-German, when the guy, I won't say he was a war hero, but he fought bravely for the Germans in World War I. But he will oppose the Nazis. He will form what he calls the Pastors' Emergency League in 1933, which is basically trying to get different ministers, pastors together to try to counteract Nazi influence in the church. And, of course, to oppose the anti-Jewish laws which are being passed across Germany. So here's another person you could look into. You say there's not enough, you say you want more. Well, here's a little more about Martin Niemöller. He goes to Hitler in person. Can you imagine that? That's what he did. He protests to Hitler in person many of these policies. He was active in the confessing church. He was arrested, imagine that, and imprisoned from 1937 to 1945. That is, till the end of the war. About 8 years. Several years of his prison time was in Dachau, the Dachau concentration camp. I've been to Dachau. These are the gates of the city, or the gates of the camp. Notice it says in German. Can you read the German there? Arbeit, Mach frei. Work makes you free. I suppose in some contexts, perhaps it does, but not in this one. It is a work camp. So that was welded into the gate so that, as you came in and out of the camp, you would see this. And you can see one of the barracks back there. You can still visit this camp. And this was not an extermination camp. They did have ovens here, but no evidence that they used poison gas here. But a lot of the people here were political prisoners, and this was the oldest camp. This was sort of the model camp for the others, for the concentration camps. Dachau. Well, how about a guy named Bonhoeffer? Ever heard of him? Dietrich Bonhoeffer. German. Don't hold that against him, I think he would say. Son of a neurologist. Neurologists really get on my nerves. No? Nothing? Okay. He becomes a minister, ordained, a Lutheran. Before the war, he even studied in America. 1928, 1929. He was in the New York area studying, and many people encouraged him to stay in the United States to avoid the problems in Germany. But Bonhoeffer refuses to do that and returns to Germany in 1931 to minister at a church. He certainly opposed the Nazi Party. What is Bonhoeffer most famous for? What do you know? Some of you recognize his name. What do you recognize his name for? Tried to kill Hitler. Well, yeah, he was in on that conspiracy. I don't think he personally tried to stab him, but yes.
Okay, he was part of the group that was trying to kill him.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. What else? Many people know him today from his writings. Well, she is.
Yeah, my mom and my dad are both pastors.
Okay.
Yeah, so I hear this name a lot. I just don't know a whole lot about him.
Well, Bonhoeffer wrote one of the books that he wrote is probably the most famous are his letters. Letters from prison, and he writes them while he is in prison, being held by the Nazis. So, Bonhoeffer writes a lot about, I think why a lot of people read him or identify with him. Certainly he was being persecuted. Certainly he was standing up for what he believed when there was opposition. He was willing to, like he chose to go back there. He had an out. He could have stayed in the United States. People were willing to help him. He could have had probably be a prominent minister here in the United States and could have continued writing or teaching or doing various things. But he went back. And then, of course, he dies in the camp. He's not released. Right before there would have been liberation, he was hanged. So he has a book called The Cost of Discipleship. This might be one that many people read, and his others, letters from prison. or just letters. But The Cost of Discipleship is probably one of his most famous books. He signs the Barmen Declaration in 1934, which, remember, is what forms the Confessing Church, and in what of course, opposes Nazi teachings. Not only did he come to the United States for a while, he was in London for several years, being a chaplain to a Lutheran congregation in London. So he studies in the United States for a year or so, year and a half, something like that. Then he goes to London, and he's actually preaching there and living in London. But he decides to return to Germany in 1935. And certainly it was clear what was going on, or what was beginning, what was happening in Germany when he returns. Once he returns to Germany, he actually is asked to head up. The Confessing Church needs a place to train ministers. And so he becomes the head of the Confessing Seminary. This is going to make him a major target, because now he is the head of the training school the Nazi, he only stays in that about a year, and he's banned from teaching in 1936, and the seminary closes in 1937. So, he's overrunning teaching there maybe more than half the time it's open. But it's only open a couple of years. But that certainly makes him a target, because he is a fairly high profile. That is, people know him in England, people know him in the United States. Now here's his other book, Letters and Papers from Prison, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He lectures during World War II. He's lecturing in the United States when World War II begins. And of course, many people want him to stay in the United States at that point. Say, look, you can't go back. But he does. He returns to Germany. He is arrested and sent to Buchenwald in 1943. He is charged with treason in 1945. This, as it becomes clear the Nazis are going to lose, and he is hanged by the Gestapo in 1945. So those two books, The Cost of Discipleship and Letters and Papers from Prison, have become pretty well known, in the later 20th century, and probably still today. Many people still read them, and knowing the concept, behind it and the areas behind it. Still, I guess you'd say, inspires people today. Because, one of the questions I guess you would have to ask yourself is, let's say you were living in Nazi Germany, what would you have done? Would you have openly opposed Hitler? Would you have cooperated? Would you have fled? Would you have defied them and tried to stay and help Jews escape? Well, Bonhoeffer had more than one chance to escape. Yet he returned to what most of his friends figured was pretty much certain, almost certainly he would be put to death, and he was. The Hitler Youth. Here they are in their sharp-looking uniforms. Probably designed by, what's the guy's name? Who's the big designer?
Hugo Boss.
Yeah, Hugo Boss. I think he designed these. Maybe they'll do a retrospective and bring back some of these designs. Hugo. I especially like the insignia on their little trumpets.
Harry Potter.
Very striking. Harry Potter has much in common with the Hitler Youth, in my opinion. They try to recruit young people at churches. They would send the Hitler Youth in, and they would have them disrupt the services. They would all march in their uniforms of the confessing churches and sort of intimidate, try to recruit the youth to join them. By the way, the previous pope was a member of the Hitler Youth. Something that most people don't want to talk about. JP2? No. No, not John Paul II. He was Polish. The next one was German. Remember his name?
Looked like Darth Sidious.
I think he was Benedict. Pope Benedict was a member of the Hitler Youth. And of course, then they said, well, you know, a lot of people remember the Hitler Youth. There was a lot of pressure to be in it. Didn't mean he was really a big supporter, which I suppose could be true. Nonetheless, a member nonetheless. Let's see, when are we supposed to end? 11:50? Who's that guy that used to wear a Band-Aid on his face?
Nelly.
Did he get rid of the Band-Aid later?
Yeah.
That's too bad. I should bring it back.
Whoever is dead friend.
A Band-Aid for his dead friend?
Yeah.
Well, they had about, the numbers would actually grow. But I'll tell you what happened to a lot of the clergy. As you can see, they were sure to be drafted into the army. They did not let them be exempted. And so that they tried anything they could to weaken the church. They protested euthanasia of the ill and the mentally deficient. They protested the practice of basically taking women to SS officers to try to create racially pure children, and several other things like that. And many were arrested, sent to prison. The liquidation of the Jews is not commonly known. Exactly what is happening by many people. There's pretty good evidence that the Pope at the time did know, but didn't bring it up because the protest would bring more pressure on the Roman Catholic Church and Roman Catholics and priests and so forth. So there's another paper topic, if you will, the Roman Catholic Church. How much do they know? When did they know it? What was their response? Many have criticized the Roman Catholic Church, especially the Pope, during this time. This is our last screen, so I'll bring it up here so we can finish it out. Many churches allied with the fascists and the Nazis. Why? Because many wanted to believe in law and order. Many were opposed to communism because it was atheistic. Both Protestants and Catholics would become involved, colluded, I suppose you might say. In the 1930s, people begin to change their minds. about some of these things, and this is why I think you see the church in so much trouble in Europe, especially in Germany, because of the people lose confidence in the church at that point. Well, we'll leave it there for today.